Okay, I think we will get started. Kate, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. I think we'll have some people that are going to be coming onto the line here as we get going, but we'll get the conversation and people will join when they can.
Okay.
I'm so pleased that we were able to connect like this. I love the fact that our colleague Lorianne Farrell from the School of Arts and Humanities put us in touch. I'm now a huge fan of Red Hen Press, where you are the managing editor, editor-in-chief.
Yes.
Yes, both. And also an editor at the LA Review,
Yeah.
of which I was not familiar and now am. Spent some time on the site the other day. And I'm very pleased that you could join us. Let me get a brief sort of intro here for everybody that's come onto the line. My name is Jonathan Neal. I am the director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Kate Gale to our conversation series. Kate, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on.
So this conversation series, so far we've been focused mostly on, I'd say, education, performing arts, some of the commercial visual art world, and this is going to be our first foray into a conversation about the literary arts and publishing in the age of the coronavirus. And I'm so curious to hear from you a little bit more about Red Hen Press and to hear how you yourself are doing in the quarantine, I'm looking forward to sort of digging in here. How are you doing? How is quarantine for you?
Well, you know, interestingly, I think that for people who are extroverts, which is basically a lot of the people that work at Red Hen, not particularly me as much, but Red Hen is divided between kind of two groups. The two founders of Red Hen, myself and my husband, we weren't married when we started it, but we did get married so that we could fight about Red Hen more easily. So we are both in our 50s. I know we look so lovely and young, but we are in our 50s. We are a little more introverted. And so I think the more introverted you are, the easier it is to sit out of quarantine. I've kind of realized. The staff, the oldest person on the staff, other than ourselves, just turned 30. And they are kind of hive kids. I mean, they're millennials and they love being together. And so it's harder on them. There's no doubt. One of my staff people is like, it's 9 weeks and 2 days. It's 9 weeks and 3 days. He keeps sending me on his updates. So I can tell they're counting the minutes like they're in prison or something when they can go back.
Right.
So I think that's one thing that affects us people in general. I think in terms of Americans, the richer you are, the easier it is.
For sure.
And I mentioned that in the sense that Red Hen is a literary nonprofit, and I'm sure you guys are talking with a lot of nonprofits.
Right.
So when I'm talking with Red Hen's donors, I notice just a sense of kickback among our donors. And it's so interesting. It's just, it will almost sometimes seem jarring to me when I'm talking with a donor and they're at their second house someplace. And I realize how relaxed they seem compared to myself.
Yeah.
Even though, I mean, like, I'm not physically desperate to get out amongst people the way my extroverted staff are. I am in a sense of, I wouldn't say emergency, but I am working very, very hard to make sure that our organization is going to stay afloat through all of this. Whereas if I were a wealthy person, part of the 1%, 5%, or even 10%, who knew no matter what, I will be okay financially through this, which is the fact for many of our donors, then I wouldn't be in any sense of an alarm. So I do think that obviously there's a lot of conversation in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and everything about the sense that this has created an even bigger divide between the haves and have-nots in this country. And obviously that becomes part of the conversation in arts management, because we all are talking to donors all the time, and you just have to be aware that even though bigger donors have lost money in the stock market,
not much anymore.
yeah. And they really, you have to just quell your own sense of anxiety about your arts organization. And when you're having a conversation with a donor, just be okay with the fact that they are still in their own comfort zone, in their second house. And that's a very odd kind of a feeling.
That's such an interesting observation.
Yeah.
And so is that, I mean, from the standpoint of then, because we've had this conversation a couple times with some other people on this series. When you say quell your anxiety, does this mean sort of playing sort of to their psychology and playing to their role and not trying to make this seem like a real state of emergency? Or is it more along the lines of trying just to recognize that they may be feeling a little bit more detached and trying to reel them in, however subtly or sympathetically? I'm so curious about this.
I think that I was just on a call this morning with one of our bigger donors, and I was really stating that there's a real need, but basically, I think that the analogy I always have to say, I always have in my mind, is that if you present the idea that we are a strong organization that will continue to be strong even in spite of this coronavirus situation, we are steady and we are all working hard and we are going to make it, and we very much deserve and feel the need for your help. So Jonathan, we know that you have means and we would like you to help us, but we're going to be fine. We're working hard and we're going to be fine. That's a presented need that sounds good. It never sounds good to say the iceberg has hit the Titanic. We can see the ocean floor coming towards us.
Right.
That's not going to work.
Of course.
Because no one wants to be part of that. So, and I think that, I mean, the only way that has worked for anybody recently, we've all seen, for those of you who have seen this online, City Lights just presented a compelling argument that flagship, one of the most important bookstores in the country, was going to close if they didn't have help, and they raised almost $500,000 through a GoFundMe project, and that was successful. But that's a bookstore, that's a community organization that wanted to pull themselves together, and I think that worked for them.
Right.
But
you can only do that once.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can only pull that lever once
Right.
before people realize that this might not be the most resourceful use of their resources.
One of the things that you've been talking with different organizations, so with different organizations, the big question is, what are your revenue streams? So whenever any of your students in your group are going to work for an arts organization or intern with an arts organization, what they will quickly find out is, what are the revenue streams for that organization? And also, of course, what are the expenses for the organization? So Red Hen has a partner organization that we work with, which is the Broad Stage.
Sure.
And Broad Stage is an amazing organization. And their revenue streams, of course, are theater tickets and donations, essentially. And then, of course, foundations fund them as well. And so the theater tickets, of course, the question is, can they still sell theater tickets? And they're planning to still sell their season, but they can only sell half the season because their season is going to be closed through December. Mm-hmm. So that kind of makes it more difficult for them. And then, of course, they're still trying to get donations, which I think they still will be successful in doing. But they also have extremely high overhead because their staff are paid way, way more than our staff are. And obviously we found that out because we're partnering with them, and we've all been talking about all this. We all applied for the SBA money. And so we all know when we got the SBA money, so we've all been talking about this. And so we've realized that their overhead is so much higher. So in terms of, you know, how, the other thing, of course, is that during this whole time, they're not selling any tickets. You know, we are still selling books. So one of the things with being a literary organization is we're not a presenting organization. We're not a theater. We're not an opera company. We're not a museum. And so even though book sales are down, Amazon, of course, immediately decided that books weren't as important as some other things, and as well they may. But book sales are still being delivered through other means, like Bookshop and Powell's and that kind of thing. So even though book sales are down, we are still selling books.
What's Red Hen Press's main distribution outlet? Is Amazon the main portion, or is there a mix?
Our distributor is Ingram Publishing Services, which is the biggest distributor and wholesaler in the country. And of Amazon is like 25% of our sales. So a lot of our sales are not Amazon.
Yeah, for sure.
So losing Amazon or having Amazon be curtailed isn't good, but it isn't everything.
Right.
We are still having book sales, in other words, just less of them. And the other thing is, of course, in a recession, people tend to buy fewer luxury products and you know, maybe less champagne, but more beer, more books, and more car repair.
Interesting. So books are included in beer and car repair. I like that.
Yeah, in the last recession in 2008, we had quite an uptick in book sales.
Okay.
I think because it's sort of a cheap thing to do. It's less expensive than going to the opera.
Sure.
So we certainly think we'll sell a reasonable number of books this year. We are obviously continuing. It's much harder though to launch a book during this time. We found we do virtual book launches and we do all kinds of, you know, obviously we've gotten good reviews, and so we promote those reviews on social media. But having in-store book launches is a much easier way to promote a book. There's no doubt about it.
And why is that? I mean, what is it about the in-store, in-person book launch that drives sales better, let's say, than digital promotions or virtual programming or other things that you could do that are a little bit more mediated?
Well, so let's just we have a book that is launching today. It's by an author named Amy Liu. It just got a review comparing her book to Somerset Maugham, and you know, it's certainly going to be a big book. It's called Glorious Boy. So, you know, Amy Liu would normally, if this book had launched during non-COVID times, she would have done an event at Elliott Bay, at Powell's, at Vroman's, probably at Diesel Books. And then she would have hit the East Coast and done some books there, bookstore events there, Politics and Prose she was going to do, probably Porter Square Books in Boston and like that. And each of those events that she would do with a major author in that area, so she would do a short reading and then a conversation with an author. Each of those events, she would try to proceed with a radio event, maybe an NPR event, would cause sort of an explosion around that in that area. It would mean that the books would be in the warehouse in that area. It would mean that bookstore, instead of just having 2 to 4 books, would have 20 to 40 books. And those books would stick around for a while and would get ordered by people or would get bought by people. And, you know, we would promote that book that event on social media for weeks before and we'd have pictures of the event afterwards. And so each event is kind of like throwing a rock in a pond. It causes ripples.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, like, there are people who will be like, oh, you only sell like 5 to 7 books at every event, but each event causes these ripples that show that you are, the book is moving, and they just build on each other, if a tour is going well. And so
And so do you have pretty good kind of A/B testing in terms of numbers of events and books that get sold through the tours and the sort of extended ripples that go out from that versus, let's say, another scenario where you've done 1 or 2 or 3 fewer stops along the book tour and see the sales affected similarly?
well, we're finding out right now. This is it. This is the experimental year where we're
Right.
gonna be finding out. I mean, like, we have an author, Kristen Miyares-Young, with her book Subduction. It got a rave review in the Washington Post, and she's doing a ton of virtual events. And that book is roaring off the shelves.
Right.
So we are going to get to find out, with her book, how well a book sells sans in-person events.
Yeah.
And it'll be very interesting to me to find out, because I think we've always assumed that without enough in-person events that a book just couldn't really move much.
Sure.
But, you know, we may find that there's more that we could have been doing all along without having an author do much touring.
And is that the authors? I mean, I know that from just colleagues and some others, you know, there's the sort of like the love-hate relationship that people have with the book tour. And I imagine there's probably also a range of authors who kind of have a love-hate relationship then with social media, right? With the
Yes.
amount of engagement that they need to do. And if you have an author who maybe is an introvert, as many authors tend to be, because you have to sit alone in a room for a long time and be, you know, at home with yourself. But then maybe you've got really good social media game, right? Maybe you've got
Yeah.
really good Twitter game, and that makes the engagement and the sales of those books even sort of easier, right?
Right.
Or one could sort of consider it's like, maybe this is not someone who wants to appear in person, but is happy to be on Facebook or on Twitter, engaging with their audiences that way. This becomes an interesting moment to sort of filter the authors into one camp or another.
Right.
Would you consider sort of adapting the promotion and the marketing going forward for the different, let's say, author types?
Yeah, I think this is definitely allowing our marketing and media people to kind of look at that. You know, because basically the advantage to this in terms of social media is that if you are kind of an introvert, on social media you can develop a kind of a persona, the way actors do. You
Right.
know, you don't know who Ed Norton or Brad Pitt really is. You know who they are to their spouse or who they are to their kids or
Right.
whatever. They've created a persona.
They're
that
exactly the
feels-
same.
Yeah.
There is nothing beneath the surface.
Yeah, empty-headed. But yeah, so you don't know that much about people, but so with authors on social media, they can present this kind of cool guy person or whoever it is they want to present that they think will sell the book. And so yeah, it does seem that that would allow people to work on something that might help them sell their books.
How are the authors doing in you know, we've spoken with some people who run galleries, with people who sort of are running arts education programs, who deal directly with artists and kind of have these relationships with their, let's call them the talent. How are your authors doing? And what kind of conversations have you been having with your authors? I mean, I foolishly imagine that in this moment, authors, because again, they spend a lot of time at home in a room in front of a computer or in front of a typewriter, that this just might be business as usual for them. But I'm sort of curious to hear what kinds of conversations you've been having with your authors and how they're doing with the quarantine and with the pandemic.
Well, So first of all, we have a writing in the schools program, and the authors who teach in that program had to quickly learn how to Zoom with
Right.
students. That was a little bit challenging for them. Not all authors were ready to learn how to Zoom, but they learned. Zoom is actually, as you know, very friendly, and easy to learn. So we figured that out. In terms of our, we have 27 books coming out in 2020.
Wow.
So when COVID hit, I would say there was varying levels of panic. And so we started doing, for the first few weeks, we started doing these calls every 2 weeks that we invited everybody who wanted to be on the calls. And we would basically go through, this is what we can do for you. We're going to do these virtual book launches. We're going to invite you to be on we had this every week for the first several weeks. We had poetry hour on the Broad stage every Saturday night, and it's going to move in the summer to being once a month, which will be more manageable. Every Saturday night was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would do these virtual book launches. So we were kind of letting everybody know we're going to do everything we can for you. And we also were giving them a lot of other sources. We have a person we know named Fozia Burke, who does all this online content for people and online has all these online resources. So we connect people with her, and people started having her help them. So we just were basically walking people through, but some of our authors, we gave the option of moving their books. We didn't give all of our authors that option because we couldn't have the whole spring list move, but we moved 3 or 4 books. I think 4 books we moved, their pub titles. But some authors just kind of, I guess a couple authors are in a state of panic, but maybe they were in a state of panic anyway. So yeah, that we've been sort of managing some panic on the part of our authors, because I think for authors it kind of feels like I've been working on a book for 10 years and now what's happening. And I hate to use this example with authors, but I've done it anyway. There are, in the publishing world, when books get released, they are released on Tuesday. I don't know why Tuesday, but Tuesday is the day that books get released. And it's just a universal thing with big distributors or
Right.
with big houses. So our book releases are always on Tuesday. And then that's the day they come out into the world. Pub dates are, unless you are with some micro press, it's a Tuesday. 9/11 was a Tuesday.
Yeah.
There are books. There are books that pubbed on 9/11. What were those books, you ask me? Who knows? No one knows now.
Right.
So, those books got erased from publishing history. Like no one knows what those were. But the books that are getting released during COVID are still being talked about. They're being reviewed. They're being read. They're being written. So I keep reminding my authors, like, in other words, I hate to say this could be worse, but definitely it could be worse.
Right.
If your book had dropped on 9/11, it would be gone now.
Right. Right.
This isn't a complete erasure of everything everybody's talking about. And it's weird because in a way, 9/11 was a single event. And then, when you think about it, the economy recovered quite quickly from 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
The economy is not going to recover quite quickly from this. There's nothing that makes you think this economy is going to recover, but it's just a longer loop. And so for a book, that's helpful, weirdly.
And so, I mean, you've mentioned that sort of in recessions, book sales seem to do pretty well. There's not part of the economy that falls off. That's a sort of interesting correlation with the broader marketplace. And so, what does affect book sales negatively, right? What are the things that you worry about or you're most concerned about in terms of the ebbs and flows of the publishing calendar?
Well, I mean, Okay, book sales will be down by 30 or 40% this year. It's not
Okay.
like it, yeah, yeah, because of COVID, book sales
Okay.
will be down. Yeah. We were expecting this, I mean, because we had a bunch of huge books coming out this year, we were expecting this big uptick this year in book sales, which probably won't happen.
I see.
So, I mean, some presses are thinking that their book sales are going to be down like 70% this year. I think that Red Hen's book sales will be down 30 or 40% this year from our original expectation. And our original expectation was that we would be 40% above normal. So I don't know. But I think that the other question, of course, is whether we can keep our donor base at the same level. We're not sure about that either. But I think that, so what's happened with book sales over the last few years is that they've been steadily on a rise. And the reasons for this seem to be that millennials have quite an appetite for books. Bookstores continue to be a hub that people want to go to. People want the physical object of the book. Ebooks sell, but they remain to be only about 10% of the market.
Right.
So it's interesting that there was a time like 10 or 15 years ago when people were talking about whether books would stick around, but clearly they are sticking around.
Yeah.
You know, when students go to college, there was some idea that they would be buying ebooks and then want to stay with ebooks, but that has not, I mean, millennials are even still buying vinyl, as you probably know.
Right.
What the hell?
Yeah.
I do not have vinyl myself.
Vinyl, I don't understand. Yeah, I mean, the idea like CDs and cassette tapes and the things that I was so pleased to get rid of. That's one thing that I've been very happy to see turn to digital. With books, as you can see from the shelves behind me, which are multiplied throughout our house, obviously, I buy books when I need them immediately, digitally, and then I usually end up buying a hardcover version if I find the book to be of value, right? If it's something
Right.
that I want to like spend some time with. So I'll have these things doubled up, both on my Kindle or my iPad, and then on the bookshelves, right? I think about them as sort of valuable pieces of furniture that you need to move from one place or another. But I always sort of consider that to be a kind of off-brand attitude, but I'm pleased to hear that it puts me in a generation class below the one that I currently belong to. So I'm curious, turning a little bit more towards what are the books that you have been interested in, or the sort of topics that you found you've been drawn to, or the storylines that you've been drawn to as the sort of pandemic has unfolded? Have you found a kind of revision in your own reading habits and your own tastes and your own sort of curiosities about what's of interest while you've been in quarantine? Have there been some titles that you've turned to that maybe you hadn't read in 20 or 30 years, or that you've always wanted to read, and you know what, now's a good time to pick that one up?
Well, I'm reading the Lost Children book by Valerie Luisella, which I had really wanted to read and I hadn't gotten to. So I'm reading that. I've been reading, I went and read Jesus' Son again because I really like Dennis Johnson. I just like his language. I
He's
reread
fantastic.
that. Such a great writer. And I had read his last book. And so I wanted to go back and read that grand book again. But one of the things I noticed, I was doing, so usually we would have done this sooner, but because of the pandemic, we kind of got behind. But not this Friday, but next Friday, we're going to have a Zoom meeting, and all the staff and all the interns get to be part of this. And we're going to discuss the novels that we are going to consider publishing. And so we're full enough that we've got 2020 and 2021 full, but we're discussing books for 2022 and 2023. And we have 8 novels that we're going to consider. And the ones that I'm most excited about are futuristic they're not really pandemic books, but they're books that are about they're dystopian books.
Yeah.
And I can see that because of this, that I'm certainly hyped on pandemic type dystopian books. And they're books that were clearly written long before this. Obviously, they just got sent to me.
Yeah.
So they're books that agents sent to me in March and April. But I'm reading them now, and clearly my interest and excitement is because of where we are. And one of them has some sort of mythical future where everybody is just paid $50,000 a year, and that's what everybody in America has to live on.
Authored by Andrew Yang.
So we all have to kind of live at the same level or something like that.
Right.
And but so there's various levels. One of them is called Springtime in Siberia, and it's sort of weird futuristic kind of book written by a Russian guy.
Sure.
I'm kind of in love with that book too. So I mean, I can see myself turning in this. I've always been a bit of a dystopian. I loved Brave New World in 1984 when I was in college, and
Sure.
then I loved Margaret Atwood and like that. So I'm always looking for the perfect dystopian book. And it's funny that people are writing them right now and have been even before this happened, but there's going to be some great ones written, I'm sure, now.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I've always been a huge SF fan, and sort of, and more from the standpoint that these are, not the sort of, grand spaceship, space opera type of books, but the alternative reality ones, sometimes the alternative history ones, which try and imagine alternative social systems, try and imagine alternative futures in a kind of elegant way, and really deal with social and political contradictions of the contemporary moment, but do it obviously through these other worlds and other kind of characters. And I've always found that very fruitful, and I'm always trying to encourage other people to do it. And because for this time, and I don't know if you experience this too, but it seems to me that the resource that we need the most of is imagination, right? And that in the current, and it seems to be it seems like it's a scarce resource, right? And so you sort of turn to the artists and the authors and the sensibilities that can think laterally, can offer alternatives to our existing scenario, and even if it's kind of in the realm of the absurd or the fantastical, it has purchase on the present in a way that matters, because it's going to help others think through their problems and their challenges and get to a place that's going to be some of these solutions. And it's interesting to me that a pandemic like we have, these external events, right? These external shocks are the things that open up the space for that type of thinking, right? You realize how much kind of conventional thinking and how much was seen to be impossible in the current scenario. The discourse just 5-6 months ago about things like universal healthcare being too expensive, and then the pandemic shows up and it's like we've already dumped $3 trillion into the economy just to try and keep it on life support. Well, where that wasn't a possibility 6 months ago, well, look at what kind of thinking has changed, right? Look at what kind of possibilities all of a sudden become possible given these external shocks. And I've always believed, this is not to diminish our visual arts community in any way, but the kind of talents and the kind of imaginations that find their way to the page are often more efficient in getting these things out there, right? And there's a way that authors have a capacity to, imaginative authors have a capacity to sort of get these new ideas out there, maybe more quickly and in a more articulate way. Maybe that's a redundancy, than our other outlets, which require maybe a little bit more learned, a different set of learned skill sets. That's a long drawn out way to say that I'm very happy to hear that you're heading in that direction, that you're going to be publishing more dystopian work, hopefully.
Well, that's definitely the plan. Yeah, I mean, along the lines of what you're saying, when the NEA many years ago decided to end all the individual artist fellowships for dance, for opera, for music, the whole show, the writers wrote to Congress, and they kept writing to Congress.
Right.
And so if you look at it now, they did end up ending all the individual artist fellowships except the
For
writers.
writers. Right.
The writers are the ones that still had it. I still think that the dancers could have danced on the White House lawn. I don't know what the visual artists could have done, and I don't know what the opera singers could have done, although singing on the White House lawn, maybe. But
That's right.
they didn't come up with something. But writing, the writers wrote.
The writers wrote,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It seems to, there is a kind of, it's a direct line to thought in a way, even though it can
Yeah.
be such a struggle to try and get it out in a way that others can sort of, to be affected by it. It's certainly important. So what's what have you seen your colleagues in the publishing world, particularly in the sort of the nonprofit publishing landscape? How are others shifting in this environment? What other things have you seen people doing, authors doing, that are making use of technology, making use of the mediated landscape, that you think has a future, even once we're presumably back to being in person with one another and engaging one another without the mediation of Zoom and social media technology?
Well, so at Red Hen, we have a big, thriving internship program. In fact, I think we have had interns from Claremont.
I bet you have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've had some from the arts management program. We definitely have them from USC, and we definitely have them from Occidental, and we definitely have them from the Arts Center, because the Arts Center, of course, they have these great students who are artists, graphic artists, and so they in and work on designs, and they're fantastic. But we've had them from different schools. And so for one thing, I think that all of us, we're actually having a meeting next week, and we're all going to talk about remote internships. So I think all of us who are nonprofits have been very reluctant to have interns who do not come into the office. And that's because it's very hard to supervise anybody remotely. But I think we're gonna try doing a little bit of that, because we could all have a lot more interns if we were willing to have somebody who, you could Zoom with,
Right.
So like, I'm seeing your guys' faces here. Why couldn't you have somebody that you Zoomed with once a week, and you knew this person, you really got to know them a little bit, and they were working on a project at their house? So that's one change I see as a possibility of happening. And that's the part of the thing is, like, Red Hen has 7,200 square feet. So when we reopen by early mid-June, our interns are going to be all spread out in what we call the community space, which is where we do like plays and chamber operas and stuff like that, so on. So we have this big space where they could all be 6 feet apart. We could have 10 or 12 people at least, but the small presses in New York and even in Minneapolis don't have as much space. And so they're going to be forced to do this. And so we're going to think about it too, because we will be limited. We usually have like 20 interns in the summer.
Wow.
And so unless we are willing to have some interns working remotely, we're going to be quite limited. So that's one thing that's going to be kind of interesting. And I think that would be an advantage, because there's always interns that want to work at Red Hen, but want to live someplace else. So that's one thing. A second thing is that I was talking with, we have an Alaskan imprint. And one of the problems with Alaska has always been that, the sort of joke is people can't get to events unless they have a dog sled. Well, it's sort of true, because there's, 9 months of the year where it's very difficult to travel. So we are going to start doing Zoom events at bookstores so that anybody can go to this event that's in Alaska. I mean, anybody could, but the presumption will be we widely promote these events in Alaska. You can Zoom into the Homer. I don't know if you've ever been to Alaska, but
Have not.
So there's this really cool town called in Homer, and I've been there, and they've got this really cool bookstore. When you go down to the town in Homer and you are at the bookstore and you walk out to the ocean there, they've got these fishing boats coming in, bringing in tuna, and you can reach up to the top and it's like a 6-foot tuna is being brought in, or a 6-foot salmon is being brought in. It's
Wow.
so cool. So they've got a bookstore there, and they could be launching books, but on Zoom, so that anybody would be ordering books from that bookstore.
Right.
So I think it's going to really enable us to launch books in places like that. But then if you can do that there, why not do that at Powell's? Why not have an event at Powell's that you are live streaming, let's say, so that people who couldn't get to Powell's that night, what about somebody who's in a wheelchair who just couldn't get to Powell's that night, right? Nobody was there to help them out or something. And so they want to watch the event and order the book from Powell's, right? And so we're starting to realize that for the differently abled community, for people who are geographically distanced, there might be a lot of different ways that using virtual technology that we allow people access to events in bookstores and in other places, that using these kinds of virtual technologies is going to open things up. So what we're doing is everything we're doing, we're saying, after we get past COVID, how do we use exactly what we're doing here to not only sell more books, but enable our communities? Because we're an organization that really wants to enable our communities. We're about building communities. So we're not just thinking sell books. We're thinking open doors, doors. That's what we're about.
That's interesting. And also, I think it's interesting that that you can have a kind of distributed, you think about this kind of transcendence of geography, right? That the digital technology allows you to, someone can log on from anywhere. But yet you also have to collapse that scope back down to saying, well, sure, everybody can log on from everywhere, but we know that's just not going to happen, right? With everything. And so how do you create a distributed community, right? In a limited geographic region, promote something heavily within a kind of striking distance geography, right? Like the Alaska, I'm thinking of the Alaska example, where it's just not going to be possible for everybody to go do this thing, but because it's happening, in your state, in your region, in your county, or something close by with other people that are going to be part of that community and part of that conversation, you can use the technology, which we otherwise think of as like globe spanning, agnostic as far as time zone and geographic locale, but really use that in order to sort of reaffirm some of that locality, right? Reaffirm some of that immediacy. And that's really, I think that's something you don't hear quite as much of, right? Because there's the sense that, oh, we're going to record the thing, or we're going to put this thing online, and anybody can get access to it. And it's like, well, let's think about anybody within this environment is really the audience that we're going for, right? And then anybody else can kind of log on if they want to.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's basically for a local group, the Alaskan writers. But if other people wanted to jump on, sure. Yeah, that's how I want to think about it. Like we're doing a virtual book party for this woman, Amy Lou, with Glorious Boy. And at first we were kind of thinking, should we invite people from all over the country? And then we're like, no, this is really for Los Angeles. Let's just focus on LA with this, And then she can do another event for the East Coast, because obviously one of the problems with Zoom events that you've probably already found is the time frame. Right.
Absolutely.
So once
doesn't collapse the size of the planet, that's for sure.
Exactly.
The rotation of the globe.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, we noticed that Penguin Random House has been doing their events at 4:00 LA time, because it's 7:00 in New York, and they're ruled by New York, So they're gonna cut into our work day, because they figure people in LA don't really have a work day. Or they figure we're willing to stop working at 4.
That's right. Oh, they will learn. I think that's, I mean, this is actually, I think, a very important point that maybe deserves more airing, because especially going forward, I think now that everyone has become accustomed to these platforms, these virtual platforms, and is going to be using them. Everybody's going to be using them, and everybody's going to be running these events. And you see how quickly the calendar can kind of get saturated, and how
Yeah.
easy it is just to sort of, send along a link to something, and it takes away a lot of the intentionality that went along with, particularly places in Los Angeles, as you found. If you're running an event, the sheer energy to attend something meant a great deal. Whereas I think our colleagues on the East Coast and some places in Europe, it doesn't quite mean the same thing, right? I mean, because you can attend 2 to 3 events in New York after 5 p.m. and they might be in walking distance. All you have to do is kind of be on the east side of Manhattan and Midtown. Just doesn't happen in Los Angeles. You can barely make it to one half an event in normal circumstances. But that meant that the people who showed up really wanted to be there. It really meant something in terms of their engagement with the material and that community. And I think figuring out how to recreate that engagement online and making these communities mean something more than just, the ability to sort of log on from anywhere and, oh, look, we got 800 people, isn't that great? I mean, it's good for promotional circumstances, but that's not community building in the same way. Right. So I want to take, I'm going to open this up to people that are on the line with us here. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat window and I'll throw them over to Kate. But I wanted to ask something else. So you're the contributors, the donor groups, the people who are on your board that are behind the nonprofit status of Red Hen. What is what has been the sort of the guiding mission or the guiding engagement for them? What is it that group loves to see coming out of your press that keeps them coming back and keeps them engaged as your funders and as your sort of key constituency? That obviously must be book lovers, but there's something that goes beyond that for sure.
That's a great question. And of course, I'm sure you talk about this with your group, that every executive director should know, with every board member particularly, but also with every donor, what it is that keeps that person engaged.
Right.
And about, I think, 10 years ago, we had an outside consultant who came in and spoke with every board member and every donor and asked them why they were contributing to Red Hen. And in other words, what do you like best about Red Hen and why are you contributing? And everybody had about the same answer then, and I hope they would have a different answer now. But everybody's answer then was, I really like hanging out with Kate. Kate is really fun. Now, you're not seeing me at my best, Jonathan, but if we were at a bar
that's all right,
hanging out having martinis, I can tell you I am super fun.
But you said you were an introvert at the top of the hour.
Yeah, but one-on-one, I can party.
Good.
So it was great information from our consultant, because the fact was that was kind of like wrong answer. Okay, because what had happened was each donor, I had sat down, I did tell them about Red Hen, but I would just pour on the charm. Like, I just thought that my job was to be charming and fascinating and to be really fun to be with. And they would be so charmed, they would be like, I'll help you out with whatever it is you're doing. Whatever that thing is you're doing, sounds great. Here's a check, right? And of course, a couple people kind of knew what we did, but they weren't really all that versed. When the consultant was like, what does Red Hen do? They were like, I guess books and stuff, maybe poetry. But we only published like a third of our list was poetry. They barely seemed to know that. So we went to work and changed that, because it's like people should be in love with the mission of what you're doing,
right,
not just in love with the executive director. So we really, it was really good information. It was really great information. So I would say that there's probably one donor who would answer that still. I love hanging out with Kate. And she's just cool and she likes hanging out with me. But I think everybody now probably has different things. Some people are really in love with the Writing in the Schools program because they want to support kids
For
learning
sure.
about poetry. Some people, there's a group of women who really like how many women we publish. We have a big solid women's list. There's a group that are really into the queer publishing that we do. So we have an LGBT list, strong LGBT list. There's a group that are interested in that. We publish a lot of African-American writing. So I think there's some people interested in that, the Latinx publishing. So some people are just interested in the diverse publishing that we do. So I think people would give different answers. I think some people, it's basically that they really want there to be a strong publisher in Los Angeles. They don't want the only publishing to be coming out of New York.
Right.
And there is a strong publisher in San Francisco, and there's one in Portland, but they feel like LA should have its own publisher. So I think that I think you get different answers depending on what part of the press people are mostly excited about. But I do hope they all like hanging out with us, but I don't think you'd get a universal, it's all about Kate anymore, because I think we've done a very good job of bringing on new board members and new donors who are in love with our mission.
Oh, that's good. I mean, I think that's certainly one of the conversations we have with our students, whether they're in the commercial or the nonprofit environment. That in this day and age, your mission, your kind of intention, and is the thing that people are buying into. But we also know, especially from fundraising, that people don't give money to institutions; they give it to people. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and so it's an interesting mix of needing to still be the person that those individuals are invested in, but to be the sort of embodiment of the mission and the person who channels the organization's ethos. And it's an interesting balancing act to have to kind of play, because if you're too charismatic, then what happens when you get swooped up by somebody else and go on to do something? We have a question coming in. What would your strategy be in addressing potential new donors right now? Let's say you had a prospect or something that you were put in touch with. It's an interesting time. A lot of people with means who are philanthropically minded are being pulled in a bunch of different directions. What would your approach be in the, let's say, the necessity or the interest of Red Hen Press now? In this new age?
Well, I first of all try to find out what that we do that they might be interested in. As I said, is this person interested in LGBT issues? Are they interested in women's issues? Are they interested in education issues? So that's my first thing. And in my conversation with them, I find out what they might be interested in. And then I kind of tend to pursue that. But I also feel, going back to what you were saying earlier, Jonathan, that we live in a time that it is very clear that what's going to, I don't want to say the word save us, but what we need is big changes to happen in the way we're dealing with things economically and politically, climate change. We need big changes to happen. And so we need more Martin Luther King kinds of people on this planet. And those kinds of big changes are going to come from big thinkers. And so, like, what I think, where do I think those big thinkers are going to come from? I think a lot of them are going to be writers, going back to what you were saying earlier. And because basically it's like, thinking comes when the intellect meets the imagination. That is what thinking is. The intellect and the imagination meeting in the garden like Romeo and Juliet. Mm-hmm. And so that is what Red Hen's mission is fostering that process of the intellect meeting the imagination. That's what Writing in the Schools is. That's what our publishing different kinds of books is. That's what our fostering, publishing diverse books is. All of that is about that intellect meeting the imagination. So if you want big changes to happen on this planet, if you want different kinds of ideas to happen, you want to support the arts. and you want to continue to support the arts. You can't just be supporting, you know, just the other issues happening right now, because the arts are what are going to save us in the end. That's how I see it, at least.
That's a good pitch. Creating the seedbed of imaginative labor that others are going to draw from, or that's going to produce itself the kind of change that people are going to want to see. I like it. I believe it. Of course, this is a little you know, I'm very much a choir to your preaching at this point.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's a conversation that we've been having both online and off, because, to be quite frank about it, and as I think you know, we are in a vibrant arts and cultural landscape, which has, even though all of us have individually gone online, that arts and cultural landscape has been taken offline.
Yes.
And that means a big challenge going forward, and that means, you know, a place that has been celebrated for its creativity and its imagination and its capacities to do things on shoestring budgets and to produce out of passion, is really going to be challenged to figure out how to reboot itself and to resurrect itself, because I think the support is going to be pretty lean for a little while.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take a lot going forward, and I think our students know that, and our faculty and our community knows that. It's going to be, we'll need some new ideas, and we'll need some new inspirations in order to make sure we're able to push it on through.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Kate, this is
working together.
It's going to take a lot, but it's going to be great. Look, I look forward to getting that martini with you, and
Absolutely.
to figuring out what other things we can do to push it ahead. Kate, Gale, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. For everybody who joined us, enjoy your lunch, and we will see you later on this week and next week as well. Kate, thank you again.
Look forward to staying in touch.
All right, fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.